If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of June 25th, 2023. The podcast that keeps the hot stuff hot and the cool stuff cool. This is your host, Shane Killian. Note that Heather and I are going on vacation, so there'll be no podcast next week, but it will return the week after. In the meantime, let's uncreate the news of the bogus. Daniel Ellsberg, the man who leaked the Pentagon Papers and changed the course of a war in a nation, has died at age 92. And there are really impressive obituaries for him in outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post. He was charged under the Espionage Act and faced as much as 115 years in prison. But as his trial was concluding, the Watergate scandal broke and all charges against him were dismissed. A few months before his death, when he announced his fatal pancreatic cancer, he said, quote, "When I copied the Pentagon Papers in 1969, I had every reason to think I would be spending the rest of my life behind bars. It was a fate I would gladly have accepted if it meant hastening the end of the Vietnam War, unlikely as that seemed." You can read the official obituaries yourself. I wanted to look at something more personal from his friend, diplomat Craig Murray. At their first meeting, Ellsberg gave him a copy of his book Secrets, detailing his path to becoming a whistleblower. Years later, they both attended a WikiLeaks press conference on the Iraq war logs and jointly presented Julian Assange with the Sam Adams Award, an award that they both have also won. Other winners include Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and Seymour Hersh. Murray wrote, "Dan Ellsberg maintained until the last his respectability in society as the good whistleblower. Yet the publication of papers from Chelsea Manning and others, similar in so many ways to Ellsberg's Pentagon Papers, became demonized, then criminalized, and Julian became the bad whistleblower, or more accurately, publisher of whistleblowers. This was all at a time when the U.S. intelligence community managed to turn people at The Guardian against Edward Snowden. Ellsberg's revelations caused a national catharsis about the Vietnam War, but we haven't really gone through that with Iraq, even though it's well known that the entire basis of the war was just a pack of lies. Similarly, there's been no such realization about the Afghanistan war and the atrocities committed by the United States there, let alone drone strikes in Syria, Yemen, and other countries we aren't at war with. Indeed, in retrospect, you can see the moment the press began their unhinged vitriol against Donald Trump, and later, to a lesser extent, against Tulsi Gabbard, and it was the occasions where each pointed out that the Iraq War was started on lies, and that they knew very well they were lies at the time. Quote, "It is extraordinary how many politicians and how many high-profile journalists cleave to the view that the Iraq War was justified because it saved the Iraqi people from a dreadful dictator. It killed or maimed millions, displaced millions more, blasted the entire infrastructure back 40 years, destroyed the economy, and set off unending civil war. But somehow, the devotees of liberal intervention see all this as better. Liberal intervention, of course, is simply imperialism. The notion that non-European people would be better off if their rulers were deposed and replaced by Western-mandated puppets is precisely how the British Empire worked. The justification was always the same. It was always for the good of the conquered people themselves." Murray also relates Ellsberg's experience with the Assange show trial. Quote, "At the age of 89, Dan gave evidence in the Assange extradition hearing by video link. The court had scheduled his evidence at 2:30 p.m., which was 6:30 a.m. for Dan in California. The defense applied for this to start later in the afternoon, given Dan's age and the time. The court refused. Then consider this also. The court had only sent Ellsberg the bundle the previous day, giving him less than 24 hours to master 600 pages of documentation before rising at 5:30 a.m. and getting ready to give evidence and be cross-examined. This to an 89-year-old man. Ellsberg testified that Assange's case in every significant part parallels his own. Quote, Ellsberg said it was absurd for the prosecution to argue otherwise. He had himself been motivated by his political views in his publication, and Assange's views were very similar. He had held very interesting discussions with Assange and felt a great affinity with him. They both believed that there was a great lack of transparency to the public over government decisions. The public were fed much information that was false. When the public had so little genuine information and were fed so much false information, real democracy was not possible. An example was the Iraq War, clearly an illegal war of aggression in breach of the UN Charter, sold on lies to the public. If anything, what Ellsberg did was worse. Quote, all the Pentagon Papers were top secret. None of the WikiLeaks documents were. They were not just below top secret, they had no restricted distribution classifications. This meant that, by definition, there should be nothing genuinely sensitive and certainly not life-endangering in papers of this classification. In relating his testimony at the Assange trial, he closes off with defense attorney Edward Fitzgerald showing him, quote, a passage in the Kronberg affidavit which stated that the U.S. government could not positively attribute any death to the WikiLeaks material. Ellsberg said that was his understanding and had been said at the Manning trial. He was shocked. It was just like Iraqi WMD. He had at first been inclined to believe the government on Iraqi WMD, just as he had first been inclined to believe the government on deaths caused by WikiLeaks releases. In both cases, it had proved they were making it up. And in closing, Murray writes, I hope that gives you an idea of the intellectual and moral stature and the incredible resilience of my friend Daniel Ellsberg. I will never forget that sparkling moment when, having been given almost no chance to prepare, and so early in the morning, he corrected in detail the counsel for the U.S. government on the contents of the second superseding indictment. It was an incredible honor just to have known him. We can only hope that there are more men of such courage among us. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odysee.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odysee is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odysee to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency, without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odysee.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. Now for more stupid DMCA tricks, as Netflix and Amazon both send takedown requests for completely legal websites. In the myth of the Hydra, every time Heracles chopped off one head, two more would spring up. In the annals of internet censorship, every time you take down one page, it's more like 2,000 that spring up. In addition to the routine abuse that we've shown from the beginning was the entire purpose behind the DMCA, the sheer enormity of the World Wide Web means that there are so many players in the field that they have to automate it. There are law firms sending literally millions of takedown requests to Google and other search engines every day, and in the midst of it all, they end up trying to take down legitimate sites as well. ReelGood is basically a search engine for streaming services. With so many of them out there now, it can be difficult to tell who has the shows and movies you want to watch. Search for it in ReelGood, and it'll search through Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu, Disney+, HBO, and many others, telling you where you can find it and how much it'll cost. In fact, they did such good a job they won a Webby. It's that sort of thing that can help people continue to be paid viewers instead of getting frustrated and turning to piracy, where these things can be a lot easier to find. None of the services it searches are pirate services, and it offers no pirated content itself, and yet it was targeted for DMCA takedown by multiple services. This isn't even the first time. Over the last few years, Reelgood has been targeted several times with takedown requests from various rights holders. There are just a few legitimate sites in a sea of hundreds of URLs in these takedowns, but that doesn't mean it's not a serious problem. How hard can it be to do a basic reality check or add a known good site like Reelgood to a whitelist? And if they succeed in taking down Reelgood, it just leaves room for an imitator to emerge in its place, one that might be doing actual piracy or even worse, luring users who trust the site into downloading malware. That's why there needs to be serious accountability for those who file false DMCA claims. Clearly, the perjury penalty isn't enough, since it hasn't been used a single time in the whole of the DMCA's existence. You or I make a mistake like this, we could face serious civil or even criminal consequences, even if we didn't mean to. These are lawyers who should know better, especially when it happens as part of their modus operandi. A false DMCA takedown notice is nothing more than an attack on free speech and should be treated as such. There must be a way to deal with this. Let's keep that in mind while we cover the next story.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.pagosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.pagosity.tv.
ChatGPT is an amazing tool. Over the past months, I've been using it to help research the quickies I do on court cases. It can be a fantastic aid. But one thing I quickly found out is, it can get a lot of stuff wrong. Sometimes it can be frustrating just getting it to talk about the right case. And in double checking everything, I've been able to make good videos, but sometimes it's been in spite of ChatGPT, which in some cases would just make up a case out of whole cloth. Apparently, I'm smarter than some lawyers who just decided to use whatever ChatGPT gave them without doing a reality check. In some cases, the cases the lawyers cite just never happened. In others, they have been modified or overturned by later cases. And these lawyers had to go before the judge in a special hearing to convince the judge that they were merely stupid, not malicious. When this happened, the lawyers' reputations were already shot, made even worse by the judges sanctioning them, which they rarely do. In one case, District Court Judge Kevin Castell smacked down Peter Loduca, Stephen A. Schwartz, and their law firm for bad lawyering and citing cases made up by ChatGPT. He ruled, "In researching and drafting court submissions, good lawyers appropriately obtain assistance from junior lawyers, law students, contract lawyers, legal encyclopedias, and databases such as Westlaw and LexisNexis. Technological advances are commonplace, and there is nothing inherently improper about using a reliable artificial intelligence tool for assistance. But existing rules impose a gatekeeping role on attorneys to ensure the accuracy of their filings. Peter Loduca, Stephen A. Schwartz, and the law firm of Levido, and Oberman PC abandoned their responsibilities when they submitted non-existent judicial opinions with fake quotes and citations created by the artificial intelligence tool ChatGPT, then continued to stand by the fake opinions after judicial orders called their existence into question. Gatekeeping role on attorneys to ensure the accuracy of their filings. Did you listen to the previous story? Maybe this would work against those DMCA lawyers. Do we have a solution? Why wouldn't the same principles on relying on ChatGPT also apply to whatever systems are generating the DMCA complaints? Quote, many harms flow from the submission of fake opinions. The opposing party wastes time and money in exposing the deception. The court's time is taken from other important endeavors. The client may be deprived of arguments based on authentic judicial precedents. There is potential harm to the reputation of judges and courts whose names are falsely invoked as authors of the bogus opinions, and to the reputation of a party attributed with fictional conduct. It promotes cynicism about the legal profession and the American judicial system, and a future litigant may be tempted to defy a judicial ruling by disingenuously claiming doubt about its authenticity. And hey, wouldn't all of that apply to false DMCA claims too? Including the tendency to never admit your mistakes and plow through anyway. Quote, if the matter had ended with respondents coming clean about their actions, the record now would look quite different. Instead, the individual respondents doubled down and did not begin to dribble out the truth until after the court issued an order to show cause why one of the individual respondents ought not to be sanctioned. For reasons explained, and considering the conduct of each individual respondent separately, the court finds bad faith on the part of the individual respondents based on acts of conscious avoidance and false and misleading statements to the court. I'm also drawn to the statement, quote, the filing of papers without taking the necessary care in their preparation is an abuse of the judicial system that is subject to Rule 11 sanction. Granted, DMCA takedowns aren't filed in court, but they are legal threats, and they do deprive people of their websites or their listings on search engines. In fact, as we've seen with the Cox case, they can also result in the loss of one's internet access, with the ISP sanctioned if they don't cut it off. Whatever tool is being used for automated DMCA takedown requests, the same concept should be applied for ChatGPT or anything else that lawyers do that's automated instead of human-generated. Let's hold them all accountable.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to reclassify this week's biggest bogon emitter. Do you remember the Schiff memo? If you don't feel bad. The press memory holded pretty quick when it was found to be a big pack of lies. Now the lies are being made to cover the lies, and one of the worst offenders is none other than Mother Jones, the same people who brought you the lies about the Ford Pinto, who deceptively edited George Zimmerman's 911 call to make it sound like he was racist, was one of the worst offenders of the Hamilton 68 lies, still champions of the cell phones cause radiation pseudoscience, who manipulated statistics to say that no armed citizen has ever stopped a mass shooting, and who even attacked James Franco for saying nice things about McDonald's. And they're still clinging to the Russiagate hoax. This is all about John Durham's report to Congress detailing the lies about Russiagate, the Steele dossier, the Mueller report, and the Schiff memo that made it all public. They describe him as the man, quote, who utterly failed to produce evidence it was a hoax. It's a truly painful read. Since it began, we were skeptical of the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, and every bit of evidence we could examine fell apart. Some were just stupid, like the Alpha Bank claim and Pissgate. One tactic is to keep pushing the information that Russia attempted to influence the 2016 election. But no one denies that. It's that they colluded with Trump to do it that's in question. The Democrats are trying to salvage this by saying the Trump campaign shared, get this, poll numbers with Russia. That's the big collusion now. But it wasn't collusion apparently for the Kremlin through Charles Dolan of the Clinton campaign and Igor Danchenko, whom the FBI knew was a Russian asset, to feed misinformation to Christopher Steele to be used as part of the dossier. And then the FBI, knowing that it was false, used it to get a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign to try and manipulate the election. And Schiff's memo was a big part of all that. When Schiff desperately questioned Durham to try and save face, he mentioned Russians meeting with Donald Trump Jr. supposedly about information regarding Hillary. Durham had answered, quote, the more complete story is that they met and it was a ruse and they didn't talk about Mrs. Clinton. Mother Jones published, quote, that is not true. But it is! It absolutely is! All of the FBI documents confirm this! A bit later, Tom McClintock said, quote, the central charge in the Russia collusion hoax was that Trump campaign operatives were in contact with Russian intelligence sources. Durham replied, there was no such evidence. Mother Jones falsely said, quote, that's not true. But again, it is. By the way, there's no byline here, so this isn't Schiff or someone publishing something in the rag. This is Mother Jones themselves, the editorial board. They go to embarrassing lengths to play the Kevin Bacon game to say that they really did have contacts who totally were Russian agents after all. But everything they've said is debunked by the reports. And of course they have all the weasel words saying, for example, that the link between Paul Manafort and his former employee, Ukrainian Konstantin Kilimnik, quote, is one of the most serious and still not fully explained components of the Trump-Russia scandal. It's not fully explained. It's mostly explained as being completely bogus, but not fully, so that totally means that Durham's lying. Do you recognize the language of the conspiracy theorists? This article is full of them. And the silliness spilled over to Congress in the response of Democrats to the House voting to censure Adam Schiff. By the way, Mother Jones never comes near the falsehoods in his memo. It's like they're just pretending they don't exist. I'm going to link to their article on it, but I won't bother quoting from it because there's nothing of substance in it. It's just whining, but Republicans lie too. Anna Paulina Luna of Florida spearheaded the censure. Censure is one of three ways the House has of disciplining its members. It's stronger than a reprimand, but not as severe as an expulsion. It passed 213 to 209, completely along partisan lines, as you'll not be surprised to learn. The initial vote failed because 20 Republicans refused to vote for it, choosing instead to vote either present or not voting. They changed their vote after Luna removed the penalty, saying Schiff should pay $16 million for his offense. Of course, to hear the Democrats tell it, it's because Trump threatened them with primary opposition. They don't mention removing the penalty. Ask yourself who's telling the whole story here. Schiff becomes the 26th representative to be censured since the first one, William Stanberry, was censured in 1832. While the speaker tried to read the censure on the floor, Democrats made out like tantruming children, shouting over him and interrupting him, delaying the proceedings. Hey, I thought obstructing an official proceeding was an insurrection. Schiff told a reporter, I take it as a badge of honor because this says that I'm effective. Yeah, an effective liar. He and his fans are already using this to paint him as a martyr in his race for senator next year. So yeah, there's a lot of bogosity to go around, but the painful, headache-inducing articles from Mother Jones has to make them this week's biggest bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.bogosity.tv. And now let's trifurcate this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week, it goes to North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper for his continued lies attacking school choice. The Opportunity Scholarship Program is an income-based program to help lower-income families pay tuition and fees at private schools. He says the reason is that private schools lack accountability. Funny then that Cooper sends his daughters to private school, an expensive one too, St. Mary's in Raleigh, where tuition is over $62,000 a year, an order of magnitude greater than the $6,400 a year maximum you can get from Opportunity Scholarship. I guess he just doesn't want any of them going to school with his kind. At any rate, his comments are just a big old pack of lies. Authoritarians like Cooper only see accountability as a top-down affair, made possible by the fact that schools get their money from the government, and so they can ensure that the government schools are performing well and spending the money wisely. Yeah, let me know when that starts happening. Less than 50% of students grade 3 through 8 are proficient in math or reading. Only 41% of students who took the ACT meet the minimum requirements. Less than 30% are proficient in 4th and 8th grade math on the NAEP. And 42% of schools received a D or F for school report cards. Let me ask you this. Does this sound like anyone's being accountable to you? Test scores have been flat for decades, while per-pupil spending goes up and up on the taxpayer's back. Where's the accountability? Let me ask you this, though. Who has the best incentive to hold a child's school accountable? A government bureaucrat or the child's parents? Private schools have to compete for your dollars and to have your child as a student. If you don't like the job they're doing, you just move them to a different school. And that means they're incentivized to do a better job, and so they generally do. Private schools have to meet all the same health, safety, and non-discrimination standards as public schools, and the students still have to meet the same testing requirements. Moreover, schools that enroll in OSP have to meet academic and financial requirements laid out in the North Carolina General Statutes. That includes providing parents with an annual report about the student's academic progress, including scores on standardized tests. They're also required to provide aggregate scores to the state. If private schools lack accountability, then why do the parents of over 115,000 North Carolina students enroll them in private schools? Why is one of them Cooper himself? Private schools are accountable in all sorts of ways that public schools aren't. In fact, public schools are shielded from accountability in so many ways that private schools don't enjoy. Claiming otherwise is just laughable. So all of that makes Roy Cooper this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this To Failure edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Remember, no podcast next week. We'll return the week after. Until then, here's a quote from Marcus Aurelius. I learned from my great-grandfather to dispense with attendance at public schools and to enjoy good teachers at home, and to recognize that on such things, money should be eagerly spent. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution on Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.